Hello. In today's video, I'm going to start by talking about general camshaft installation. I just got done degreeing this cam, and we'll talk about that in the next video, which I'll do in a few minutes. But I had to rig a dial indicator on the exhaust lifter because I couldn't get the lifter out. And it made me realize I need to say something about installing cams. Now, as they age, and if you're working on a motor that's running as opposed to one that you're completely rebuilding, you may want to try and do a cam swap, and you got to get the lifters out. Now, normally when I take a motor apart and I'm rebuilding it, if I have a lifter that won't come out the bore, I just kind of bring it up as far as I can so that I can get the camshaft out, and then I push the lifter back through the bore and let it drop out the bottom of the motor. The reason I do that is because you don't want the lifter bore to get all scarred up. Now, normally it's just a bunch of crud that's built up on the bottom part of the lifter that doesn't actually ride in the bore. And so it's carbon, it's burnt oil, it's nothing major. But if the cam's going flat or you got a burr on the bottom of the lifter, then if you force it through the bore, you can scrape up and tear up that bore, and you don't want that. If the lifter bore gets too scored up or too loose, the oil will not fill the lifter well, and you'll wind up with a lifter that no matter what you do, you can't seem to get it to pump up well. And so you want to be as nice to those lifter bores as you can. And in a rebuild, that's not a big problem because, like I said, you can usually push them right out the bottom and it's no big deal, and the lifter bore is great. The problem shows up if you go to try and swap a cam into a motor that's older and keep going. And I just needed to tell you that that is something that can come up on trying to get a camshaft in, just doing a camshaft swap on an older motor. Now, there's a couple other things that I wanted to bring up, just general camshaft information. Now, on the Cadillac cam, we all know, it has the 2-bolt gear. You have the eccentric on the front for the fuel pump drive, and the gear for the distributor drive. Now, when you line up the gears and you're going dot to dot, which is when they're the closest point together. So the top gear is all the way at the bottom, and the bottom gear has the dot all the way at the 12 o'clock top position. And so that's dot to dot. Now, when you do that, and that's how I recommend you do it, that's actually number 4 cylinder on firing. So you're not going by number 1 when you're dot to dot. Technically, to have number 1 up, the dot on the upper pulley or upper gear is straight up at 12. So it's 12 o'clock and 12 o'clock. But that's hard to line up. And so dot to dot is a better way to go. Plus, if you ever look at a Cadillac cam, and I know you're not going to be able to see this in the video, but there's a flat on the camshaft just behind this gear. That flat is to help you get the timing chain up and onto this camshaft so that you have some slack. That way you can put on the lower gear, and then you can get the upper gear kind of lined up. You can get the chain on the lower gear, and then you can lift it up and put it on to the camshaft itself. And that flat gives you a little slack in that chain. If you are the other way around, to where you're going to have both dots at 12 o'clock, well, then you don't have that flat, and you're going to fight getting that chain on. So you really want to do it dot to dot. The other thing I want to remind you about, even if you're running a electric fuel pump, you want to put on this eccentric for the mechanical fuel pump. Now, you have it. It's going to be on the old cam. It's just held in by a single bolt, and you can pull it off and move it over. The reason you want it is should the motor ever have a problem, like diesel on, or something like that. A lot of times when they do that, they run backwards. And so when that happens, the camshaft can move forward. And this little eccentric will hit the front cover and keep that from happening. And so it's a good thing to have in there. You don't want that inch of space to where that camshaft could shove forward for some reason. Because if that happens, the lifters can drop in between on the camshaft, and you'll have trouble. So that's something to think about, even if it's an electric fuel pump. You want to put that eccentric on. The next thing I want to talk about is the camshaft itself. Now, I will try and attach a video to the end of this one that I put in the Facebook group. When I first worked on this motor, and I took it out of the back of a shop, and it was sitting there for 20 years. It was supposedly a good motor, and it's been a very good motor, but I haven't done anything to it. It's not rebuilt. All I did was make it run. But one of the things I did before I even started it was made sure I had oil pressure, but I also made sure that all the lifters are rotating. Most people, for some reason, think that the lifter just rubs on the surface of the cam, and that's not true. The camshaft lobe has a taper on it, and the lifter has a crown on it. And what happens is, as it rotates, the lifter itself rotates around. So it's not really a friction thing. I mean, I always find it interesting when guys, I'm going roller cam and eliminating that friction at the camshaft. Well, there really isn't a lot of friction. This is going round and round. And so it's not like it's dragging it across the lobe. So one thing that I like about the Cadillac is by having that distributor up front so you can drive the oil pump, before you put the intake on, once you have the camshaft in, you can get the distributor set, you can get everything hooked up, and you can actually roll the motor with the starter and make sure that the oil pump is engaged, that you're getting pressure, and that all of the lifters are rotating. You want to look down in the valley and see them all spin. If you don't have one that's spinning, you got to figure out why. Same when you go to put the lifter in. If you've got a new cam and you go to put the lifter in, you might take a little pick and make sure that the lifter will spin in the bore before you start dropping push rods in. Because you need to make sure that spins. If for some reason it does not spin, it will go flat. That's one of the failures of a flat tappet camshaft, is that the lifter is not spinning. And this is true even if you're building a new motor. You want to drop them all in, make sure they all spin freely. If you got one that doesn't, you need to look at the bore and try and figure out what's going on. Now, sometimes when I'm just cleaning up, I just take a very light ball hone, fine ball hone that fits the lifter bore, and I just lightly kind of deglaze it. Don't run it for minutes. You're literally just, a couple of swipes in there just to make sure there's no crud or burrs there. The other thing is, once in a while you get a burr at the very top of the lifter, and sometimes you've got to clean up that spot if you go to drop the lifter in and it doesn't quite want to spin well. But it's worth your effort to save the cam to make sure that these spin before you get to the point of actually running this motor. Now, like I said, they spin because of a crown on the lifter, and they spin because of a taper on the lobe. Now, I've been told by some of the guys that build just stock replacement motors that one of the things they're having problems with is they're getting some cams that are not tapered. So if you've got like a stocker replacement cam, I mean, I'm not talking one of the Cadco cams. I mean, those are coming from Iski, and they've got a really good reputation, and or comp cams. But the ones to really kind of double check, and you can check any of them just to make sure, but you need to check the taper. You measure at one end, you measure at the other end of the lobe, and there should be like 2 or 3 thousandths difference from one end of the lobe to the other, because it should have that slope, and so it can make the lifter spin, and you're just kind of riding on that edge. So that's one thing you can double check to make sure that your new flat tappet cam is going to lift. It's, you know, part of like blueprinting a motor. The other thing is the same with the lifter, is you can hold two lifters together and see if there's a crown on them. Some of those generic lifters, I mean the generic cams, even the stocker cams, most of this stuff is now being made in other countries. It's not really done in the U.S. anymore. Now, you know, an Iscadarian cam or a comp cam or some of those are all done here in the U.S. and ground, and like I said, with Iski especially, you've got really good double checks to make sure it's good before it goes out. But if you bought just a rebuilder stocker replacement cam, that may not be true. And same with the lifters. If you don't buy decent made lifters, you need to at least look at them and make sure that the crown is good. Now, there's some rumors going around that, you know, some lifters aren't hard and whatnot. Well, there are guys out there that do, like I said, a lot of repetitious replacement motors. And they test stuff to kind of see. And what they found is even the cheap lifters had the proper hardness. Everything had the right hardness, the camshafts and whatnot. But what they found was the crown wasn't always there and the taper wasn't always there. So they started double checking some of those things before they put them in a motor, so they don't have to go back and redo a camshaft, because that costs the company money. And that's good information to have, even for us that just build an occasional motor. Is, I mean, you're going to have the cam on hand for, you know, a week or two at least before you're stabbing it in the motor, because you're gathering up parts. Well, you know, take 45 minutes or so, and a dial caliper or a micrometer would be better, and double check some of this stuff. Look for the crown, look for the taper in the camshaft, and make sure that all that is going to be good before you plan on stuffing it in. Because if it's not, that's the time you can call up a company and say, hey, you sent me this brand new cam, I have not run it at all, and it's got no taper. I need another cam. That's something that they'll deal with right away. Once you put it in and it goes flat and you call them up, hey, my cam went flat and that's your problem, they're going to argue the point of what you did. It's hard to argue when you've got a brand new cam, especially when you could send it back to them and they can measure it for themselves and see that there's no taper. So it's one of those things that is good when, like I said, blueprinting a motor, making sure everything is right. It's worth the little bit of time it takes to check at least some of the lobes, if not all of them, and make sure that they're correct. So that's just some of the basics about putting in a camshaft. There's just one or two special things about Cadillac that I want to bring up, like the eccentric I did. The other thing is, do not lose track of the bolts that are on the camshaft. They're a special bolt. They are a special length. They have to have that little star lock washer on them. If you look at a camshaft, if the bolt is too long, it'll stick out the back and start gouging the block, and you don't want that. And the distributor drive is literally right here. And so if the head is too big, if you substitute it, and the big mistake most people do is they mistake the oil pickup tube bolts for the camshaft bolts. That's the biggest mistake guys do doing a caddy. Well, the head of those bolts bolts will stick out far enough that it'll start catching the distributor. And you don't want that either. So when you take these two bolts out, make sure you keep good track of them. Put them in a baggie, mark them camshaft. You know, they're a flatter head, they're a little shorter bolt, whereas the ones down here on the pickup tube are more of a normal bolt. And it, to me, it's obvious because I've done quite a few of these, but just make sure that you are using the correct bolt and that it's ready to go. And that's one of the odd things that comes up from time to time with the Cadillac that's not just in general, you know, how to put in a camshaft. And I'm not going to go into degreeing a camshaft or any of that. It's pretty normal, just like any other motor. The number one cylinder is over here. You can do number one, you can do number four if you want, if that's easier for you to work from, that's fine. Just remember which one you're working on. And the rest of it is pretty straightforward, just like any other motor. So that's it on the general information of putting a camshaft into a Cadillac motor. And I wish you luck on all your projects. And don't forget that these come with plastic timing chains. So if your motor hasn't been done, you need to probably do a timing chain. So anyway, I'll talk to you later. Have a good day.